Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. All right. Welcome to the Mikestand. Today is Tuesday, April the 15th, 2020. Okay. I just need to check something real quick here. All right, just trying to check some here with this. All right. Well, anyways. All right. Anyways, I was just trying to see if I could get rid of that thing, but apparently they won't let me get rid of it. So, anyways. So we're gonna, well, it looks like we do have some more people in here already. So what we're gonna go ahead and do, I guess we'll talk about what's on tap for tonight already here. So I've got one article I'm gonna go over from, from Bleeding Fool, talking about auction upcoming documentary, Shopping for Superman, a documentarian's journey through comic book culture. As I saw, that would be taking up much of the time, I believe. We'll be going through that article. That's an Avi article, another one from our old buddy Avi Green. Um, also, um, also, what we'll be doing tonight as well is, of course, we'll go over last night's, as we head into WrestleMania this weekend. We'll go, of course, go over last night. Go Home Raw from Monday Night Raw. We'll look ahead to tonight's NXT and talk about some other rumors and news in regards to WWE and AEW, including a signing and at least a show of interest, a signing of one superstar to WWE and another shown interest once their contract is up. We'll talk a little bit about that. Then we'll, of course, wrap things up with this day in Neach history. So, with all that being said, of course, why don't we go ahead and get started? And as always, friendly reminder, of course, if you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people here to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. With that being said, let's go ahead and bring up the article here. Over. All right. Oh. Alrighty then. So here we go. Shopping for Superman. A documentarian's journey through comic book culture. Article by Avi Green, published today. All right, so Sci-Fi Pulse interviewed Wes Easton, the producer-director of Shopping for Superman, a documentary about specialty stores. and how he views the industry. And what was one of the earliest comics he'd read? And he read? Hmm. Oh, this is from the interview. Nicholas Yanis or Nicholas Yanes. What was your first encounter with comic books? Was there a moment in which you realized you had fallen in love with this medium? Wes Easton. I remember having Action Comics 678. They saved Luthor's brain and being endlessly entertained by the cover and the book itself. Plus, this was Superman we're talking about here. And then they found a way to kill Superman. And then they found a way to kill Superman? Oh man. I remember telling my mom and any adult that would listen, in parentheses, candy cigar in mouth, quote, I need to know more. Great Caesar's ghost. They're killing a legend, unquote. Superman, Batman, and then the X-Men, in parentheses, thanks to the Fox Kids show. Of course, so we can kind of get an idea of when this guy probably was growing up around. He's probably growing up in the 90s there. And Spider-Man were everywhere. But I found it hard to keep track of everything from the grocery store and newsstand, so I would end up reading a story here and there and have a cursory understanding what was going on. I didn't care really. I loved it. Luckily, there were a lot of single issue stories which let me enjoy things without having to collect multiple issues to follow a longer story. I wish there was more of that these days for the larger titles. Yeah, I mean anthology, particularly anthology. Now, granted, by the point this guy was probably reading them, all the books had become feature books in the '90s there. But as for some of you who've been with us on our historical comic retrospect and looking back to the early days of comics, right? We've seen how those anthologies have really done well by themselves. You have all those multiple stories, and people talk about diversity today, but there was more diversity in storytelling back then than there is today, when you had many of these anthologies have all kinds of different genres involved. Some superheroes, some westerns, some sci-fi, you name it. But anyways, all right. So as we continue on here, the added bonus to all of this was that not everyone seemed to like comic books back then. So it felt a little like something that was more for me than anybody else. And this is one of the things I taught. I know there have been some people that we know who have objected to how I use the word niche to describe what I cover. For anime, cartoons, comics, manga. Because people who are in those fields don't think of themselves as niche. Now traditionally, and this is kind of what I'm alluding to. There was a time when these topics were considered, even pro wrestling was considered kind of a niche topic. Wasn't something that everybody was really into. You did have more of a small yet very devoted following to it. And eventually a lot of these stuff, like again, anime, cartoons, comics, pro wrestling, mangas, they eventually did grow to more of a mainstream appeal. Now, there's obvious speaking here, responding to, I think, what I just read here. Let's see. And again, if you guys haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. I'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So as we continue on here, okay. So this is obvious speaking, as I said. Not everyone likes comics today either, unless it's to serve as a political platform for leftism, or even movie material for merely profiting off of at the original comic expense. But all that aside, interesting he alludes to the early 90s stunt when DC editorial made it seem like they were killing off Superman because even if they did intend to revive him, in parentheses, though not for altruistic reasons, unparenthesed, it was still very insulting to the intellect they'd subject an entire franchise to such a stunt, especially given that it wound up leading into to much worse one, Emerald Dawn and Zero Hour, which forcibly portrayed Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, as a villain, and there were at least a few increasingly repulsive similarities to the atrocity that came along following the following decade. Where women were victimized by similar storylines, Identity Crisis and Avengers Disassembled, in parentheses there. I attribute some of that to the Phoenix Saga in X-Men, which decidedly didn't do comicdom any favors in the long run. Seriously, what's so great about a story where a heroine is turned into a madwoman and wipes out a billion beings in another solar system? Thank goodness that was retconned about 5 years later, so it wasn't Jean Grey, though it's all been corrupted and taken apart again in some way or other since the turn of the century. I'll be continuing here. On the subject of stories spanning multiple issues, there's something I'm assuming Mr. Easton did not clearly raise in the documentary, or maybe we'd be getting somewhere not only in terms of formatting, but also in terms of storytelling. If he'd acknowledge company-wide crossovers, which the death and return of Superman was a product of, in manner of speaking, did more harm than good ever since Jim Shooter set the ball rolling with since Secret Wars in 1984, and argue why the times come to quit with such dreadful nonsense. Maybe we'd see more self-contained stories like what he found more engaging back in the day. But even then, a case must still be made, while paperback and hardcover is still the more ideal way to go at this point. And the obsession with variant covers must cease as well, mainly because that alone does not guarantee a good story inside. And it's head shaking how so much ink was wasted on variant covers that could have been put to use for wall paintings instead. Okay. Going back to the interview here. Going back to the interview. And before I do that, let me check again to see if there's any anything being said. Nope. All right. Let's see. Yanes. While comic book intellectual properties are more popular than ever, comic books in comic book stores don't have the same cultural presence. What do you think can be done to increase comic book sales and help make shops more popular? Easton, I think stores have made a really strong go of elevating their presence online and in their communities. But that's not really enough to interest people who aren't comics readers already. I think a big help would be if publishers and studios like Marvel made more noise about comics that are coming out already out and related to the films they're making and could drive new readers in. I'm just rereading it myself there for a moment. But advertising books and collections would definitely be a great start. Some shop owners have repeatedly asked why there aren't TV ads for comics from publishers or streaming ads. I think that's a big part of the problem. A great many people aren't being inspired to say, quote, that looks cool. Where can I find that? Unquote. Another great way to make shops more popular. Watch, buy, recommend shopping for Superman. All kidding aside, advertising dollars from publishers and distributors that reach people outside of the established circles might actually help keep readers. Basically, the idea of if you're not only promoting to the people who are already comic book readers, but also promoting those who may not, but can become interested, or may show that they may be willing to become interested, would be a good way to go, I think is what he's saying there. And back to Avi here. First, let me see if anybody's... Again, feel free to comment and or ask questions if anything here grabs your attention. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. But what about entertainment value? And why not acknowledge how writing merit in the mainstream declined beginning in the 90s, and art merit went south to 15 years ago? Why not also admit ultra-leftist politics have also ruined much of the mainstream? Even independent comics aren't immune. Of course, advertising's a vital component of selling, along with how and where to buy but if there's no artistic merit, sales won't last. Maybe this also explains why mainstream publishers, for starters, don't belong in the ownership of conglomerations. But if even independent publishers make no serious attempt to advertise in wider mediums, then obviously something's wrong there too. Back to the interview. Yanes. One of the arguments made in your documentary is that comic book stores are competing against Amazon. However, the number of independent bookstores, as well as Barnes & Noble locations, are increasing despite competition from Amazon. Why do you think comic book stores struggle to replicate the success currently experienced by other bookstores? Easton. Well, that's an interesting comparison. Bookstores are traditionally very distinct from comic book shops in more than a few ways. I think one of the most obvious ways is bookstores don't just sell comic books; they sell all kinds of books. They'll sell like classic pieces of literature, bestsellers. New York Times bestsellers. So that's the most obvious difference between a bookstore and a comic book shop. But anyways, I digress. Since they're very different creatures, I don't know if the comparison is entirely fair. In parentheses, isn't it interesting that we value comics as much as non-graphical prose these days? Way to go, comics, on parentheses. I will say that the bulk of the material that you find in a comic shop isn't just new issue floppies, and of that inventory, in parentheses, cards, trades, toys, etc., on parentheses, Amazon offers a great deal of it at a lower rate with super fast delivery. They literally undercut retailers, and sadly, there's no pushback from companies to demand that they only offer their products at MSRP. They're moving inventory so they don't care, right? But it devalues the product and makes it so that someone doesn't think getting in the car and shopping locally is worth it when they can get it cheaper and straight to their door. Well, okay, here's what I would argue on that point, though. Here's what I would argue at that point, on that point. Part of the I think part of the appeal of actually going to the store and buying a comic, but buying it online, first you have the chance to interact with other comic book fans. You know, you can share the experience and make it a truly, social and personal experience for you. You know, and and yeah, maybe if you do order something online, they can get it to you same day delivery, but you don't have to anticipate and wait for it to come. And if something happens to where, like, for whatever reason, the same day delivery, at least when you go to a store and buy it and bring it home, you got it. You go and you basically go and you basically pretty much just you go buy it, you have it in your hands right there, and you take it home. You know, put it into a little I think they call them what, bag in the boxes or whatever, the little plastic things, plastic covers, protect them and all that from wrinkling, from damage and all that. But but yeah, so I mean, you might be able to get it cheaper and have it delivered to your door, but you can still get it same day if you go. I mean, you don't even have to wait for it, right? You know. It has been Amazon's model for years and years. They don't care if they take losses if they're dominating the market. Comic shops can't afford to do that, and so they lose a lot of customers to groups like Amazon or even Barnes and Noble, which still has more warehouse space and flexibility than any mom and pop shop. Now, independent bookstores, there's a lot of potential in those. The one in my town has a good bit of graphics for kids, but not a ton in the way of teen adult. I think you'd see way more interest in graphic storytelling for the uninitiated, but I think comic shops still suffer a bit of the misconception that comics and graphic storytelling is just for kids. If someone hasn't seen the evolution of the material and the stores that sell them over the past 30 years, and then they'll only think the shop is like whatever. The Big Bang Theory tells them. Um, I think that common misconception is why you don't see a lot of readers in their teens up through adulthood come through as often. Well, I think if they're talking about like the show Big Bang Theory with Mayim Bialik and those other three guys, yeah, I could see the point there. For a kid, if the idea of comic book culture is Big Bang Theory, then that might be somewhat of a problem. The general perception to kids are that those guys are just kind of kind of geeky, kind of dorky. Do I really want do I really want to be like them? you know, you know, So I mean, let's see. All right, so now this is Avi responding to what we just read here. No doubt, the misperceptions are still very prevalent, and it could easily be said that's why, for many years, North American animation was almost entirely relegated to kiddie fare. Um, well into the mid '90s, and it's not like even The Simpsons ever changed it enough. Let's also consider that political exploitation of animation only hinders the ability to convince older audiences why it's worth their time, just like with comics, as previously mentioned. Yeah, because if even in animation, if you're getting hammered, certain ideological values that you don't agree with, you're going to turn it off. You're not going to want to hear it. That's pretty much common sense 101, right? Avi continuing here. But if the issue of artistic merit isn't raised, how do they think they'll be able to convince most consumers, no matter their age, to take interest in comicdom and find what to enjoy? Why, while adventure is a great genre, I think it can still be beneficial to encourage kids, teens to learn how to find drama absorbing, though it shouldn't come at the expense of action adventure themes. DC Marvel were built on, or at the expense of action adventure themes DC Marvel were built on, and must be developed organically. The same can be said of character drama and interaction, which should be foremost among heroes and civilian co-stars. Hmm. Hey, if it shows up on the stream, if you haven't already, if you can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people in here to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the question to the best of my ability. Now, as we continue on here, Yanes. On this note, in the past, I've written about how comic book prices are increasing faster than inflation, while book prices haven't, and video games are dirt cheap. In parentheses, the increasing cost of being a comic book fan versus inflation. I guess that's the in parentheses. I guess that's the name of his article. What do you think companies can do to make comic books affordable? Easton. If your only goal is distraction, then sure, games give a great return on investment. I'm playing Zelda Tears of the Kingdom finally, and that's only because I finally spent a couple $100 on the console, and then another 40 on the game. Would the same cost translate to 40 plus hours of comics to read? For some titles, actually, that's possible. Comics are turnkey fun. You don't need a PS5 or the latest NVIDIA GPU to jump in, and I think that consideration gets lost in the shuffle when people try to compare the two. Games require an interface designed to become obsolete, whereas comics can be grabbed and enjoyed immediately. I don't think the cost of comics are too outrageous when you see what your $5 can actually buy you these days. But I get it when I bring home a stack of comics that cost me $60. I think of that as money well spent at a store I love for stories and art that I'm going to appreciate. In some cases, though, I find the current model to be insubstantial in floppy form and really wish there were another 5 pages or so to really give the book a little more oomph. In parentheses, every artist and writer just decided to stab me. Unparentheses. Oh boy. If there should be a decrease in cost for comics for anyone, it should be for shop owners. The margins on new comics are pretty low, and it's impossible to run a store where you only offer new books, which discourages buying anything new for your customers to try. Flexibility in the wholesale price would be a huge help for a lot of shops. Let's see. So I can find the cursor, of course. All right. Here we go with that. So here's Avi speaking again, of course. And here, once again, we see what's wrong with the whole picture. Even the documentarian himself sounds like he's uninterested in comics making the switch to paperback hardcover. Sure, $5 or so may not be as costly as $40 plus for a video game cartridge or disc, but it's still insulting to the intellect if it turns out there's barely 20 pages of story inside. And when you have to spend as much as $60 to buy what could be 10 floppies that once would have just cost a little more than $2 for a whole lot in the Bronze Age. Let's see, 20 oh, wait, 10 floppies. So now, yeah, that's, $2 during the Bronze Age. As we know, during the Golden Age, that would have been like $1. So you get 10 bucks for $1 back in the Golden Age. Go figure. Then it becomes ridiculous. So while a paperback hardcover book obviously wouldn't be much cheaper, if you bought several simultaneously, in parentheses, and they could be pretty heavy to carry together. Uh-huh. Yep, I do know that. I've seen my fair share of that. Wouldn't that at least make for something more relaxing to spend one's pastime with? Much less strain on the hands than a joystick and keyboard, too? Hmm. Indeed. I do, and this is Avi continuing to speak here. I do see Easton may allude to how even older stories count as something to encourage a new reader to try out, And that's important because why is everyone being told only brand new stories count as a jumping on point? When the Marvel Epic collections and the recent DC Finest archives can provide you with whole stories that could be completed at one's leisure. hmm Well, that's for me. That's kind of what I did. You just go all the way back to the beginning and start, reading through the stuff, and then you can kind of as you're reading, you can kind of watch how the universe is how that particular universe is built, and maybe even get some enjoyment and some more context out of it too. Let's see, where are we at? And why isn't anybody emulating the less politically motivated, more subtle styled writers of the times employed? Uh, or, if it matters, why don't they take on more challenging issues without ascribing to a leftist playbook? Back to the interview here. Back to the interview here. Yanes. While researching for this documentary, were there any facts you discovered that surprised you? Easton, you're asking some dangerous questions. For both our sakes, let it go. I was never here, and in parentheses, smoke bomb. This may sound schmaltzy, but the biggest surprise was just how welcoming and kind shop owners, comic artists, writers, and even distributors were when I approached them. There are always exceptions, but once I made clear that I respected their time, it was really rare that anyone either passed on an interview or was in any way confrontational. I worried at the start that the toxicity of the fandom I'd seen online was more prevalent in the culture, and I'd just been lucky my whole life. Turns out that jerks are the minority in both the industry and the community, broadly speaking. Yeah, that usually is the case. A loud minority has a tendency to do a lot of damage to the majority. Right? Right? Let's see. Oh, and I learned more about the mafia being involved with early comics distribution than I expected. If the mafia were even real, in parentheses, I'm no rat. Well, as some of you may know from when we go back and we've been reading through a lot of the Golden Age stuff, the mafia were fairly, at least within the storylines, were fairly influential. Excuse me, and we get ready to head back to see what Avi's response to all this is. Something tells me the claim organized syndicates having connections to early delivery and distribution is exaggerated. Though, if there were any, I'm sure it wasn't intentional on the publisher's part. That aside, of course, it's fortunate that he didn't find the kind of bad attitudes found online, though it should be noted there are bad apples abound, and even quote unquote professional creators who engage in poor behavior online, if anywhere, and it's a real shame they sullied comicdom when even wasting tons of energy attacking the Comicsgate campaign instead of bettering artistic merit along with their own conduct. A bad attitude coming from a creator can be a key factor in poor sales for any particular comic. And similar points can be made about movies and their actions, actors, writers, directors, producers. Back to the interview here. Hmm. There we go. I found it finally. All right. All right. So, James, back to the interview here. On this note, why do you think comic shops continue to be so important to geek and nerd communities? Easton. The short answer is human connection, as I was mentioning earlier. The stereotypes about geeks, nerds, lacking social graces, and abjuring social interaction isn't entirely baseless. But that really hasn't been my experience. Comic shops continue to be a place where they can find their new favorite thing while chatting with people who are either already familiar or just as curious as them. And while you can get a little taste of that all over the internet, we're social creatures and face to face interaction has a significant impact on people's moods, thinking process, etc., which is true. It is true. The other thing to consider for shops that order a nice wide array of offerings, you have a place that allows you to respond to art in a way that doesn't always translate online. Not only can a cover pique your interest on a new release wall, but you're allowed to pick the art up and give it a look before you take it home. And along the way, see what other people might be interested in. It's an immersive experience with the possibility of positive social reinforcement. A lot of people liken the comic stores to a sort of quote unquote third space. Your work and home are both spaces that you routinely switch back and forth between. And the third space is the place you go to forget about the other two for a while. And for stores that have embraced community play with things like Magic the Gathering, D&D, or some form of board game night, it's a place you go to see your friends and take a break from all your worries, in parentheses, or to borrow from the cheer thing. Yeah, oh yeah, where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. Right? For those of you who might remember Cheers from back in the 80s there, or have seen the reruns and syndication over the years. Well, and this is Avi speaking again. Well, I'm glad he did have a positive experience at specialty stores, but maybe he should also research how some creators have conducted their behavior online and show the courage to acknowledge it can be damaging when they act native for all the wrong reasons, and even go so far as to blacklist conservatives whose beliefs they don't agree with. Yeah, well, I don't. Yeah, that I get where Avi's coming from, but at the same time, I don't think you should have to always, do that. You know, I mean, we've made fun of this. We've made fun of the stupid before here. As Tug likes to put it. But I think Avi bemoaning the fact that he's not really calling out the bad people or bad behaviors or all that. Sometimes just go to enjoy the comics. Don't have to turn every situation into World War III for crying out loud. Back to the interview here. Yanes. When people finish watching Shopping for Superman, what do you hope they take away from the experience? Easton. For fans of comic shops, I hope they learn something new and walk away feeling like someone made something just for them. It's definitely a unique film in that it considers the fanboy and the people who are new to comics in general and tries to give them both a fun hour and a half. For people that are new to comic shops, I genuinely hope it encourages them to visit a comic book store and talk with the owners, clerks to find that perfect story for them that keeps them coming back for more. Comics aren't just stories where super powerful people beat each other up, and from one page to the next, you can find inspiration, beauty, and horror in combinations you never thought possible. My genuine hope has been that people who run comic shops feel appreciated and understand that there's a love for what they do and what their stores offer, and I hope they keep up the fight to keep their doors open. And then here's Avi's response to that statement. On that, good luck. But let's be clear that it all depends on whether they're selling merit-based material that ensures their longevity, no matter the genres and themes and focus. And if Mr. Easton's documentary doesn't have anything to say about the artistic damage the industry's seen along with moral damage, then what good does it do to focus on the sales side? It's practically cheap to just focus on the business side when even the moral and artistic side is relevant. Failure to confront what the industry did wrong artistically won't improve sales fortunes for specialty stores or anybody else. And then someday, if the industry collapses, there's no telling if anybody will admit what went wrong. And whether wokeness destroyed the medium. It'd be great if somebody filmed a documentary with a seriously objective view of the artistic side of comicdom. But alas, if past examples are any suggestion, it's unlikely such a documentary will be made. Well, here's a thought, Avi. Here's a thought. if you feel that strongly about it, why don't you do that documentary? If you feel that strongly about it, why not? Instead of just saying, "Oh, somebody else should do it," why not do it yourself? If you feel that, if you have an idea of what you think you want to tell people, right? You have an idea of what you think you want to tell people, and how you think things can be fixed. Well, do something about it, right? Do your own documentary if you like. You know, don't just sit back and say, "Oh, somebody else should do it." Do it yourself. See how it goes. So that's all for the articles we have tonight. As I suspected when I picked this one out, I knew it was going to probably take a good chunk of the time to get through, which I believe it has. And yes, it has, because we're already at the 51-minute mark. That one article took us pretty much, I would say, about 45 minutes, when all was said and done. 45, maybe 45, 48 minutes, I'd say, when all is said and done on that. So we'll try to get through things pretty quickly here. So as I said, so now we're gonna do, of course, the wrestling wrap up real quick. We do have, of course, we're gonna go over last night's Monday Night Raw, the Go Home Raw before before this weekend's WrestleMania, as well as look over tonight's NXT. And look ahead, as that's their go home show, not just before WrestleMania, but also before their Stand and Deliver pay-per-view. And then we also got a couple before I even get into talking about the results from last night and all that. A couple of interesting news pieces that came out today. Of course, Jeff Cobb, who was at least most recently wrestling for New Japan Pro Wrestling, it's been reported that he has signed with WWE. So we could be seeing Jeff Cobb, formerly of the United Empire. He's currently one half of the tag team champions, I believe, in the IWGP tag team champions in New Japan. It's been reported that he may just simply be leaving and not, he's just, they're just going to vacate the belts apparently upon his departure. But apparently it would appear that Jeff Cobb has signed with the World Wrestling Entertainment. Also, it was recently reported, I guess, Mariah May, who is currently under contract with AEW right now, I guess in an interview recently, she somewhat mentioned that she'd probably be interested in going to WWE once her contract was up with AEW. Supposedly, chances are her contract's going to be up with AEW by sometime this summer. So how much more they use her between now and the end of summer is kind of hard to say. So, but the question will be, if Mariah May does in fact go to WWE, how much time will she really get there, considering they've already got a pretty stocked talent base, and I don't know if Mariah May is considered somebody that they would just send right down to NXT, because she already has some pretty significant experience in the world of professional wrestling, So I guess we'll just wait and see on that. So now, with that part being said and done, let's go back to last night's Raw and talk a little bit about what happened on last night's Raw. So, and basically, in somewhat of a preview of what could be happening at WrestleMania this weekend in the tag team match, and Bayley with Lyra Valkyria in her corner. Defeated Liv Morgan, who had Raquel Rodriguez in her corner. In a singles match. In kind of preparation for the idea that these four women will be challenging each other. Bayley and Valkyria will be teaming up to take on Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez with the WWE Women's title on the line. Rey Mysterio, with the rest of the LWO in his corner, will be defeated Julius Creed of American Made. After the match, El Grande Americano attacked Rey. Again, furthering the heat build towards Rey Mysterio's match with El Grande Americano at WrestleMania this weekend. AJ Styles, in his preparation for his match against Logan Paul this weekend, will be taking on Karrion Kross, who has Scarlett in his corner. In the main event, saw Finn Balor and Penta go to a no contest, and they're set up for the four-way coming up this weekend for the IC belt. So now, with that being said, let's look ahead to what's going to be going down on tonight's NXT. When I get there, last night's Raw, by the way, came from the Golden One Center in Sacramento, California, with Michael Cole and Pat McAfee on commentary. Let's see where we're at with tonight's NXT. Tonight's NXT, which of course is coming from the Performance Center in Orlando, Florida, and it will be on the CW. In a fatal four-way match to determine the number one contender to the NXT North American title, and I believe the winner of this match will be getting that shot at Ricky Saints for the North American title at Stand and Deliver this Saturday. Ethan Page takes on Wes Lee. They also take on Eddie Thorpe and Lexis King, the current Heritage Cup champion. And in a number one contendership gauntlet match for the WNXT tag team titles, the teams of Josh Briggs and Yoshiki Inamura, Tyson DuPont and Tyreek Igwe, Hank and Tank, the No Quarter Catch Crew duo of Miles Bourne and Tavian Heights, and the Culling duo of Brooks Jensen and Nico Vance, to see who will get a chance to take on Fraxium, the NXT tag team champions. For this Saturday's Stand and Deliver pay-per-view from Paradise, Nevada, from the T-Mobile Arena in Paradise, Nevada. In a ladder match for the vacant NXT Women's North American title, already qualifying for that ladder match, Izzy Dane, Zarya Sol Ruka, who just recently won the women's speed title, by the way, and Kalani Jordan. And then there are two more women who are set to two more spots still open in that particular match. Ricky Saints will be taking on the winner of tonight's Fatal 4-Way, as previously mentioned. There will be a Fatal 4-Way match for the WNXT Women's title, as Stephanie Vaquer will be defending against former champion Julia, Jordan Grace, and Jada Parker. A triple threat match for the WNXT title. Ova Femi defends against Trick Williams and Javon Evans. Oh, there we go with that one. And with that, that's all I got for you on the wrestling wrap-up for you tonight. So now I'm going to go ahead and move on to, with today being Tuesday, April the 15th, 2025. Let's go ahead and take a look back at this day in Niche history. History! So 2015, 2020, 2020, and of course, 1995. All right, then. So, first off, we're going to head back 30 years ago today, as on this date 30 years ago today. So I pull it up here. Shin-Ei Animations, Crayon Shin-Chan, Shin-Chan, Unko Size Ambition, premiered in movie theaters on this date back in 1995. So 30 years ago today, the Shin-Ei Animation, TV Asahi, ADK, anime movie, Crayon Shin-Chan, Unkoku Size Ambition, translated as Mr. Smelly's Ambition. Premiered in Japanese theaters on this date back in 1995. So now moving ahead, of course. Moving ahead to 2015, I believe. So just 10 years ago today. On this date in 2015. This date in 2015. The 260th issue of Archie Jumbo Comics Double Digest went on sale on this date back in 2015. So 10 years ago today, 260th issue of Archie Double Digest went on sale. Jumbo Comics Double Digest went on sale on this date back in 2015. Sold for $6.99 with 288 pages. Wow, that's big book. Big book. All right then. Okay, so moving ahead to 2020 now. On this date in 2020. On this date in 2020, as of course part of their post-WrestleMania purge, the WWE released a number of talent on this date 5 years ago in 2020. Some of the more well-known names include Kurt Angle, Rusev, EC3, Aiden English, Leo Rush, Billy Kidman, Mike Rotunda. Let's see. Lance Storm, Shane Helms, Heath Slater, Carl Anderson, Luke Gallows, who've been back since, Eric Young, Sarah Logan. So on this date, 5 years ago today, 5 years ago today, the WWE released a number of talent in their post WrestleMania purge, which they've been doing for the last few years here, where basically it's kind of a reset. Of course, over the past year, people come back from injury, also signed some newer talent. So what they usually do is following WrestleMania, they will usually release talent talent they think that they're not going to use anymore. So that's been kind of a habit of the WWE the last few years here. So anyways, getting ready to move on to the final piece of niche history here. As 2020 is just so nice that we're going to hit it twice. And also on this date in 2020, premiering on Peacock and Hulu, DreamWorks Animation's Cleopatra in Space premiered on was an American sci-fi animated series by DreamWorks that premiered on Peacock and Hulu on this date back in 2020, 5 years ago today. All right then. So, with that being said, I thank everybody for being here tonight. Hope you all enjoyed the show. Of course, we'll be back here with more Niche News tomorrow. And of course, don't forget that Sunday I'll have Metal from the Vomitorium joining me, as we'll be looking back through comics that went on sale in May of 1940. So I believe we'll be doing David McKay and Eastern Color, but I'll have to double check. Let's see. Bye bye. Actually, no. I think it's actually Fawcett. Actually, I think now that I think about it, it might be. But I guess I'll have to double check and make sure. But with that, I thank everybody for being here, and I hope to see everybody back here tomorrow. Bye.